Dr. Waldinger, thanks so much for joining me on the Mark Divine Show. Super stoked to have you here. Appreciate your time, and I'm excited to talk to you. You know, before we get started, I started studying Zen when I was 21 years old.
You did?
I did,
Whoa.
and so I was really excited to read your bio. And I've got a copy of your book, and I've known about the Happiness Project for a long time, so I was super stoked to talk to you. But then I was like, wow, gosh, a full-on Zen Roshi working at Harvard. And
Yeah.
that's such a like
I know.
mind mess for me, right? Because Zen is all about dissolution of the ego, and yet you're right at the center of some of the biggest egos in the world.
Well,
In a
you're
good sense.
exactly right.
In a good
And
sense.
no, but it's been a huge point of practice for me
I
because I
bet.
have to, I mean, and think about like, in this world of podcasts and
Right.
publishing books and stuff, like how do we come back to just presence and letting the ego kind of subside? And it's a real constant practice that I'm
I
engaged
can
in
see
around
that
all
as
this.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I make it my practice as well. Like I always asking myself, who is the interviewer here?
Yeah.
Who is right? Mark
Yeah.
Divine. Mark Divine is
Yeah.
nothing but a bunch of constructs and ideas, and I kind of left him long ago behind. But you have to resurrect the personality energetically, right? To impress or to
Well,
be taken as real, right?
yes, and it's a helpful fiction. I mean, you and I need this fiction of the self in order to know to show up together to do this podcast, right?
Right,
Like
right.
so
I love it.
so we use it, but it's just like not holding on to it so tightly
Right.
when we're
That's the kind of
lucky.
that emptiness concept. Like it's
Yeah.
just keep it empty of the grab of identity and just let it be much more flowing and relaxing. I
Yeah.
find that I'm much more spontaneous and effortless. The Japanese term shibumi comes to mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And especially in the last few years where I've just really surrendered into it. Anyways, I know that's not what we're here to talk about, but it'd be fun to
I could talk about this all night.
I
So
know it'd be
you
fun to
just
kind of come back
yeah,
later and because I'd
absolutely.
love to hear how, a Harvard psychiatrist and professor balances that because, my experience, and I know this is part of the reintegration process, but when you have these experiences of awakening and like that dissolution of the ego, the first thing that I wanted to do was run away from everything.
Yes. Yes. And I did actually.
Did you?
I mean, I don't know if I'd love to talk about this now if you want.
Let's go for it. Yeah. I mean,
So,
it's my
so
podcast. So I get to do, Mark,
yeah.
the person formerly known as Mark, gets to do what he wants to do.
Okay. So here I am, Harvard professor, and I stepped out of my comfort zone to give a TED talk at a
Okay.
little TEDx event in Brookline, Massachusetts, in an elementary school auditorium. And even that was like coming out in public a little too, like I thought, oh,
Wow. How long ago
my
was that, by the way?
that was in 2015. And I
Right
thought
on.
my my research colleagues were going to think I'd gone over to the dark side. And then the talk blew up, it went viral, really viral.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought this is all ego and I just have to shut all this down. So I went on a 3-week retreat and
Mm-hmm.
my Zen teacher said to me, do not retreat from this. That what you want to do is bring ideas out to the world that you feel are helpful.
Right.
And so she was the one who said, don't you dare run and hide.
Don't
It's
run from
not.
the world. Right.
And that was really helpful for me because I was going to be I was going to have nothing to do with anything that smacked of ego.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused. Ego is different than personality, right? Ego
Yeah.
is the identification with that self,
Yeah.
whereas everyone has the conditioning of a personality. So we can, when you have that dissolution of the ego and you start moving away from that, living from witness, then I think that reintegration process that I first kind of ran from was like, okay, now let's bring source, spirit, whatever, witness back into your personality in full force,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
that way you can serve with clarity and charity and
Yeah.
not be so absorbed in what the identity of Mark or
Yeah.
Robert is doing.
Exactly.
So beautiful.
Exactly.
Now, of course, I could go down and talk about this forever, but I want to stay on the Zen track for a while. I learned from a martial arts grandmaster named Nakamura in New York City,
Oh.
Kaicho Tadashi Nakamura, who happened to be a
Uh-huh.
Zen practitioner. I call him a Zen master, but he wasn't. in a monastery. We would go to the Zen Mountain Monastery in Woodstock, New
Oh
York, where
yeah, yeah.
Dido
Dido
was the head
Luri.
monk. You know Dido? He was
Dido Luri.
such a
I've read a
character.
lot of his stuff. I
Yeah.
never met Dido, but I heard he was a real
He was a
character.
great guy because he was first covered in tattoos, former merchant marine, but
Wow.
he had been he was a true master because you could tell just by looking at the serenity and how like serene practitioners who really have calmed their ego and calmed all the nervous system and their body like reorganizes itself. And what I experienced in him, and I saw this in Nakamura too, who I believe also was an enlightened master, was their skin was very, very smooth, no wrinkles, and very, very shiny, just radiating energy,
Wow.
like almost
Yeah.
light, like a halo, right? The kind of the biblical representation of that just emanating from his body. Yet he chain smoked cigarettes and would sit around and tell jokes. This guy was hilarious. He was fully embodying life. I loved
Wow.
him. So we
Wow.
would go up there for several times a year for these 4 or 5 day retreats where we would do like the hard and the soft, the yin and the yang. We go out and train hard for karate for a couple hours, and then we come back and sit with the monks who were in
Yeah.
residence, and then do the wax on wax off of working in the garden and cleaning the
Yeah.
dishes in silence. And it was just precious. But I've
Very
never
cool.
kind of long periods of session or been to a long period in the monastery or a Zen retreat center or anything like that. What was your experience like? How did you get interested in the path of Zen and stick around long enough to become a Roshi?
Well, I'd been interested in Buddhism because it was the philosophical system that made the most sense to me
Right.
about what it means to be human and alive in the world. But I'd tried to meditate and I would always stop when I got stressed. And somebody said to me, what you really need is a group that you sit with regularly and you need to find a teacher. And I
Mm-hmm.
found the teacher by accident. Like in, almost 20 years ago, I wandered into a Unitarian church near my house and somebody said to me, that minister up there, he's a Zen master.
Nice.
And so I went to meet with him and really thought I could learn from this man. And I started sitting with his group and then realized that this was what I had been yearning for. So
Mm-hmm.
I just kept being drawn more and more into Zen practice and koan study
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually teaching.
Oh, that's terrific. So you did all this while you were also following the Western path of teaching the Western models
And
of
being
psychiatry and
right, being a
philosophy,
shrink, being
being
a
a shrink.
researcher. Yeah.
One of my favorite books on this kind of confluence of Eastern and Western philosophy is Already Here by Bruce Tift.
Oh, I know of that book. I haven't read it.
Yeah, what I love, he was a psychologist who then became a Buddhist meditation practitioner, and then bringing Buddhist teachings into his patients, and he left psychology behind, and then he said, "Oh, that's a mistake because there's a both and here, right? There's a hand in the glove approach, and the benefit of Western psychology is you're working to develop the ego that wants to strive to be better." But that then eventually you come to a point where you have to let that go, and that's where the
Right.
Eastern idea of everything's okay as it is. Let's surrender to the now and learn to be present by letting go of these ego structures. And he was onto
Exactly.
something because there's a very famous quote from, I forget who said this, but you have to be somebody before you can be nobody, right?
Yes. Yes.
And this is
Yes.
a problem. This is a problem for a lot of the folks, especially with the early movement into Zen when there was psychedelics involved, right? Or meditation, I should say, is people wanted to just completely dissolve into the non-duality, and they didn't have the ego structures to be able to reintegrate. Or same
That's
same problem I see with Kundalini practitioners. They move all this energy and they just blast off into space, but they don't have the ego development to be able to reintegrate, or even the
yeah.
physiological structure.
Yeah. And and we think about that a lot in psychiatry because some people suffer from real problems of self-cohesion. They feel at this deep level they don't know who they are and they feel like when they're with one person they're a completely different person than when they're with somebody else and
Right.
it's a very disturbing condition. And so what we say is that those are the people who should not have those experiences of body and mind falling
Right.
away in meditation because it's disorienting.
Right. I
that
see that.
that's for people
But
who already have a basic sense of who they are.
I'm so glad you said that. I want to reinforce that. Like it's a contraindication to be use a term from, you know, medical
Yeah.
profession to
Yeah.
do meditation if you haven't really resolved a lot of the, childhood traumas that lead to personality disorders or disrupted or arrested development. And maybe
Yeah.
we could talk a little bit about like how do you know if you are a good candidate for meditation? Because right now in culture, as you know, it's just being prescribed as, hey, everybody do this.
I know.
You
I
know,
know.
there's
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
there's no like how to do it or why to do it or in what way to practice it. It's just like go do it, as if meditation is one thing.
And
It's
right, and of
and
course,
good for everybody. And it's
as
not.
we know, it's not one thing and it's not good for everybody.
Right.
There are people who find it really aversive to meditate, and
Right.
that's okay. I
Right.
think what I think what all of us could benefit from is some practice that makes us come into presence. So
Right.
meditation does that, right?
Right.
Where, you can be with the breath, you can be with whatever's arising, whatever's reaching your awareness as a meditative practice. Great. But for some people, it needs to be martial arts
Right.
where and you're very present as you're going through a particular set of movements. For some
Mhm.
people, it's skiing down a ski slope. For
Yes.
some people,
Love
it's
that.
working in a garden. So it's whatever brings you into presence, whatever brings you out of the thought loops
Hmm.
that we're constantly caught up in
Hmm.
and helps you keep coming back to presence.
Right.
So I don't think it has to be meditation at all. And for some people, it shouldn't be.
Right. That's well said. And the way I teach it is not only that, but also there's often a long preparatory period of laying the groundwork, right, in the body mind system so that you can meditate effectively.
Yeah.
Right. And this is why, like, when I started meditation, I called it concentration camp because, we were doing like the inhale, exhale, count one, inhale, exhale, count two, and trying to get to
Yeah.
10.
Yeah.
And it was damn near impossible to get to 10.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
And when I did, if I did, I realized that I was tricking myself, that I was actually
Yeah.
thinking very subtly. Right.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that was part of the process. So that was like, and all that was built on top of a foundation of physical and physiological control through hardcore physical training and also breath work,
Yeah.
which all preceded the seated meditation so that my mind was already kind of stripped bare and able to be calm and hold its attention from those, the concentration power that comes from training the physical body.
Yeah.
And so a
Yeah.
lot of people who are not healthy or um, haven't, have been inactive and have an inactive body, but that leads to kind of agitation and anxiety in the body mind system because they're not moving energy, and
Yeah.
so then you try to sit them down to meditate, and their mind is just bouncing all over the place.
Well, and I'm sure that your physical training was foundational for being able to
Yep,
sit with your mind in the way that you did.
big
Uh,
time.
yeah.
I love this. One last thing I will say is like when I started studying Zen, I was in Manhattan with Nakamura, and I write about this in my book, The Way of the Seal. I was a CPA and I was getting my MBA at Stern School of Business. So I was going down that professional white collar
Yeah.
path.
Yeah.
And so the beauty of meditation when you stick with it long enough is you do then have these moments that happen quite by accident in my case where you just drop off.
Yes.
And in that dropping off, you're there, but your mind isn't your thought streams or ego structures are not there. There's something else that's there, that presence, that witness. And as time stops, it's extraordinary. But I always brought back a little gem with me, and that gem was like insight. And through this process, 4 years of meditating and in that whole kind of environment, I went from being a CPA to being a Navy SEAL.
Wow.
Literally,
Wow.
like a 25
Yeah.
year old MBA CPA becomes a Navy SEAL because of meditation.
Exactly. And that's what, the myth is that meditation is just contemplating your navel, right? That it's an
Right.
excuse for inaction. But you're giving that kind of example that I hear over and over again. Meditation helped me to arrive at a next step in my life that was
Right.
fundamental, that was essential.
Right.
So you got up off the cushion and changed your life.
That's right. because it's a practice of self-inquiry, like inquiring at your deepest level,
Yeah.
right? First in the stillness, and then by bringing little gems back, which could be like insight, but then by inquiring about that insight,
Yeah.
right, and asking better questions. Such a phenomenal practice. I hope everyone listening, will explore a little bit deeper, like whether it's right for you or how to engage or even do some preparatory work. For us,
Yeah.
breathing practice is great preparatory work because, that's a great way to still your mind. The pranayama, we do box breathing, just, 5 count hold, 5 count in, 5 count hold, 5 count out, 5 count hold.
Yeah,
Very,
and
very
we have a
effective.
sangha online that people are welcome to
Do you?
check out.
Where is that? What's the
It's
URL?
newtonzen.org, NEWTONZEN.org. Um,
When do you do your
Monday
sits?
nights, 7:30 Eastern time.
Oh my gosh, I
Um,
might join you.
oh, come. But also like there's like I use Insight Timer and I put some of my Dharma talks on Insight Timer. There are lots of places to get, as you know,
Insight.
to get good things. If you're
Yeah,
interested in exploring what you and I have been talking about, there are
yeah.
lots of resources for people.
Insight Timer is a phenomenal tool. Well, let me shift focus. Tell people, tell us what is that the happiness project like? And this is something extraordinary. Like it's been going on for years.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, like how did this start, and what have been some of the biggest breakthroughs, findings?
Yeah. Well, what's so unique about it is that it is the longest study of the same people going through their lives that's ever been done. We're in our 85th year.
Amazing.
It started in 1938 with two groups, a very privileged group of Harvard College undergraduates, sophomores,
Hmm.
and a very underprivileged group of boys from Boston's poorest neighborhoods and most troubled families, living in tenements, often with no hot and
Right.
cold running water, and familial problems like domestic violence and alcoholism. And the question for both groups, the privileged group and the underprivileged group, was how do people thrive? So it wasn't a study of what goes wrong with
Hmm.
human life, which is commonly what we do. It was a study of thriving.
Right.
How do people manage to stay on good developmental paths as they go through their lives? And so we started with 724 all young men, and then we quickly brought in wives as they got older,
Hmm.
and then their children, more than half
Okay.
of whom
So
are
it
women.
expanded.
So
Was it originally intended to be a
no,
80-year longitudinal study? Or, no.
no, they thought maybe 5 years, maybe 10 at the most. My predecessors would never have dreamed that I'd be talking to you today about the study and that it's still going, that we're still collecting data even as we speak.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
So, what were some of the early findings, and now what are we able to do with the technology that we have today? To be able
sure.
to go deeper.
Well, some of the early findings are, first of all, that education and privilege matters.
Yeah.
So our Harvard group lived on average 10 years longer than the inner city group.
Wow.
And we think that had a lot to do with their access to healthcare and their economic resources and their education because they could keep themselves healthy as information began to come out about not smoking, not abusing alcohol or drugs,
Hmm.
exercising regularly, all that.
Hmm.
Um, but the other thing that came out, which will not surprise you, is that taking care of your health matters hugely
Right.
for how you get through life, your happiness, and certainly your health, and how long you live. So, of course, many studies have found this, but our study found that one of the most powerful predictors of who's going to do well throughout life is taking care of your body.
Yes, fascinating. I mean, it makes
Um,
obvious sense to me. I mean, I'm a yogi at heart and a Navy SEAL,
Yeah,
close
well,
second.
I mean, Navy SEALs are the fittest people on the planet, right?
Right.
So yeah, and then, do you want to hear about the one that surprised us, the big
Yes, I'd
ticket
love to.
item that, yeah, that is the finding about relationships. What we
Right.
discovered was that the people who stayed healthiest and happiest and lived the longest were the people who had the warmest connections with other people.
That's
And
amazing. Yeah.
and we didn't believe it at first. So we
Really.
thought, okay, it stands to reason if you have good relationships, you'll be happier. Okay. But how could good relationships make it less likely that you'll get coronary artery disease or
Hmm.
less likely that you'll get type 2 diabetes or
Hmm.
arthritis. Like, how could that be? And so, first of all, other studies began to find exactly the same thing.
Hmm.
So we began to have real confidence in these results. And then we've spent the last 10 years in our laboratory studying how this works, how
Hmm.
relationships affect our health.
Hmm. And that's the substance of your book, The Good Life, right? Because
Yeah.
I noticed it, like every chapter really is some different angle, a look at how thriving individuals relate to others, to family members, to significant others.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Like now, if I again move back out into my kind of Zen yogi mind, it makes sense to me, right? Because you're opening your heart in relationships, you're letting positive energy permeate your body mind system, right? Your body keeps the score, right? So if it's keeping the
Yeah.
score, if you're pessimistic and negative and gloomy, and all that negative energy is getting you unhealthier and unhealthier until you get disease. But if you're positive and you're optimistic and you have faith and you're in relationship with others, this is why church groups and meditation groups and working out together and all these things, when you do it in relationship,
Yeah.
it leads to all sorts of positive health benefits. But
Well,
that's
and
just
what,
anecdotal. It's so cool that you're proving it.
well, right. And what you're talking about anecdotally is what the science shows us. And the science is about stress and stress reduction. So,
Right.
what we find is that good relationships help us manage stress. And as we know, stress comes along all day, every day,
Right.
right?
Right.
And you know from your SEALs training that when you face a challenge, the body revs up. The body goes
That's right.
into fight or flight mode, and that's a good thing. We
Right.
want that to happen. But then when the stressor is removed, we want the body to calm back down again.
Right. Right.
What we believe is that if you don't have anybody at home or anybody you can call to talk about your stresses with, upsetting things that happen, your worries, if you don't have that, then your body stays in a kind of chronic fight or flight mode with
Right.
like higher levels of circulating stress hormones and higher levels of inflammation. And these things gradually wear away body systems. And
Right.
that's how it could affect the coronary arteries in one person and the joints in another person.
Right. I think that's exacerbated by the speed of information and also the negative nature of just all the information that's flowing into everybody. And
Right.
I've recently been interested in this idea that hyperarousal, which it's kind of what you're referring to, is everyone being in a state of fight or flight. Hyperarousal actually occurs because the neural pathways that turn on and off the sympathetic uh, and parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest, they get stuck on
Yeah,
in the on. They
exactly.
get stuck on, like
Exactly.
atrophied, and or the other one gets atrophied. So it's like a railroad track. You can't actually activate the parasympathetic calming system anymore, and that's devastating
Exactly.
for your health.
Exactly. And so what we did, we ended up bringing people into our lab and stressing them out deliberately, and then watching how they recovered from stress and watching how soon the parasympathetic nervous system could kick in to
Right.
get some indicator of how people did recover from stress as one
Interesting.
index of well-being.
Right. You use some terms in your book that I'd love to kind of like get a little bit of insight on. Social fitness is one. I mean, I can guess what that means, but what does that mean,
Yeah.
and how do we develop social fitness?
Well, we made up that term, okay? And we coined the term to be analogous with physical fitness.
Right.
Because what we found was that perfectly good friendships and good family relationships would atrophy. They would wither away, just like muscles atrophy from inattention, from neglect.
Right.
And so, what we found was that the people whose social worlds stayed active and stayed energizing were the people who put effort into it.
Right.
Even small efforts over and over again kept those connections vibrant and alive. And so our thinking is this is like physical fitness. It's
Right. You
like
got to
something
work at
you got to work at it and you got to keep it going. You don't just
it.
stop. I don't go to the gym today and then come home and say, "Good, I'm done. I don't ever have to do that again." Because I used to think, when I was in my 20s, I said, oh, I got my friends from school, from college, from work. They're always going to, my friendships are always going to be there. They're always going to take care of themselves. And that's just not the truth.
Right.
And so what we find is that the people who really, really take these active steps over and over again are the people who end up with these benefits that we're talking about.
Wow, I can attest to that just from my own experience. I think that's so accurate, especially for high achievers, like for me as a
Uh,
CEO, and for people who tend to be, academics who are out doing their thing, and you tend to end up siloing yourself in this
yeah,
little bubble of professional peers who, may or may not be intimate friends with, but most likely not, right? Where you're going
exactly.
to share your challenges and what struggles are, and you're going to get relief from that relationship. And I recognize this is a few, like 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm not a spring chicken either. You know what I mean? I'm 59 right now, so took me that long to figure this one out. That I'm like, oh my god, I've got to nurture my old friendships because I want them and need them in my life.
Well, and that's what we're hoping, that people will, people will read the book, people will get these ideas and really see how they might do their life differently in just the way you're describing.
Yeah,
And ideally, they do it when they're young. But, it's
right.
never too late.
Well, it's not really oftenly taught unless it's kind of modeled in your family.
Yeah.
So it's great to bring that kind of to the forefront. And what is obviously having close friends is going to bring that kind of ability to downregulate the nervous system, and to feel more nurtured. But looking at the opposite, if you don't have that, if someone's listening and going, man, I really need to get that, I'm just kind of lonely loner,
Yeah.
what are the negative effects physiological and psychologically from, I mean, we know the psychological effects of loneliness, right? It could lead
Right.
to
Right.
depression and anxiety and
Well,
despair.
we know that loneliness is a stressor.
Okay.
And so and then we know that it has all these effects that, that I just named.
Right.
And so, for example, we know that loneliness makes us heal more slowly and less well. There was a study at Ohio State University where they gave people skin biopsies, little punches of skin. It wasn't as awful as it sounds, but
Yeah.
they did this with people who were taking care of a demented relative and people who were not, but same age and everything else was
Right.
comparable.
Right.
And what they found was that the people who were taking care of those relatives healed their little wounds 39 days later on average than the people who were not taking care of
Wow.
impaired relatives. So, and what we know is that, for example, taking care of a demented person is one of the most stressful things you can do.
Hmm.
So, stress has real powerful effects, and that means loneliness and social isolation have real powerful effects on how we bounce back from viruses, on how we heal from surgery. Uh, so many ways that stress prevents us and loneliness prevents us from essentially being our best physically as well as emotionally.
Yeah, that's amazing. You talk about in the book how happiness is not an achievement, and how we can often overlook some of the simplest things around us that can be a source of happiness. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh yeah, well, and you know this as a Zen meditator,
Right.
right? That you know looking at the most ordinary things, but giving them our full attention can
Hmm.
be wonderful. It can be
Right.
mind blowing. I mean, if
Right.
you go outside and just spend time looking at a tree, but really look at it for like
Mm.
5 minutes, you'll be amazed at what you discover that you've never seen before. If
Right.
if you watch an ant crawl across a floor, like just watch that, just do that. I'm telling you, one of the things that I did at retreats a lot, we do mindful eating. So you
Right.
eat, but very slowly and very mindfully. You take a bite of food and then you really savor it. You feel exactly what it feels like in the mouth and you savor the flavors and then what it's like to swallow each bite. It's mind blowing to do that. And it's all it is the stuff we do every day. But if we give it our full attention, um, everything pops with an aliveness that normally we miss.
I love that. And I love this idea that is similar to what we were talking about earlier, like becoming more aware and even attaining some sort of awakened awareness state, which, some people believe is becoming more and more accessible, and more people are experiencing it because we have so much now information and so many opportunities to access people like yourself who are teaching these things. But it's not an achievement. It's not something, again, it's back to our conversation, like of the striving of the Western, model of personal and professional development or psychological development. It's more of the surrendering. It's not an achievement. It's actually,
It's
it's within you. It's not something you're grasping outside of you. So happiness is within you, and peace is within you. It's not something to grasp for.
right. And one of the things that we know is that happiness comes and goes. So
That's
that
right.
experience of being happy is never present all the time.
Right.
And we can give each other the impression that it's possible to be happy all the time.
Right.
If I just do all the right things, right? If I eat the right things and I do the right physical activity and I have the right mindset, I'll be happy 24/7. That is not the truth of any life. And it's important to name that because we can look at other people's Instagram feeds and
Right.
Facebook pages, these curated lives that we put out
That's
there
right.
for each
Yeah.
other. And we can believe that other people are having these happy lives and we're the only ones who don't have it all figured out. And
Right.
and I can tell you from all of my work as a researcher and a psychiatrist and a Zen practitioner, ha- nonstop happiness doesn't exist for any human being on the planet. I just
Right.
want to say that.
No, I love that. I like to draw the distinction between contentment and happiness, right?
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
right. So, and this is with the Buddhist teaching, right? You're always swinging between running toward that which you desire and running away from that which you fear, or, is going to bring
Yeah.
you discomfort. And so happiness, is often found at the relief of either one of those, right? And then
Yeah.
it's gone as you swing back in the other direction. But contentment is knowing that in spite of all that, everything's okay because you learn to not get caught up in the drama of it, right?
Yes,
So you
exactly.
detach from the drama.
In Zen we talk sometimes about the basic okayness of life,
I love
that
that.
even at the worst of times there's a sense of this is okay. I can be with this.
Since we bounced back into Zen for a second, what is like your most powerful tool to help people experience what you just said, that sense of being alive, right? Because I've often said, hey, people say, what is witnessing and what's the experience? I said, well, the experience is not of the mind, but just imagine right now, or just close your eyes and experience being alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. Said if you can experience being alive without thinking about it, just knowing that, holy shit, I am alive. There's a certain quality to that is ephemeral and very, very concrete, though, at the same time. Most people,
Absolutely.
they dismiss it. They don't pay attention to it. They're just so wrapped up in their thoughts.
Well, and that's where I think simply bringing attention can
Right.
be a huge factor in that sense of aliveness. So if you think about it, like, why does time seem to go at such a different speed when we're traveling in a new place? Like if you
Right.
if you think about like arriving in a new place, the days seem really long in a good way
Right.
because you're having so many experiences and you're paying attention because you need to pay attention.
Right.
Like, where am I going and what am I going to see now, right?
Right. And it's
And
all
then
new. So you're
it's
lingering and you're savoring and you're
it's
intrigued.
all new. And
Right. I
so,
love
but
that.
then think about when you drive to work and it's a commute you've done every day, right? And a lot of times you'll get in the car, you'll arrive at work and you'll think, I don't even remember this drive. Like, how did I get here? Right. So
Right.
so it's time disappears. And so I
Hmm.
think what we know is that if we can bring what they call beginner's mind in
Right.
Zen, that mind of freshness, to something as simple as brushing my teeth,
Right.
like suddenly there's an aliveness to brushing my teeth that most of the time I don't even notice. Sometimes I have trouble remembering if I brushed my teeth already because I'm on automatic pilot. What if we take ourselves off of automatic pilot for even the most ordinary things?
Yeah. I love that. This probably relates to this next question, but you use the term, another one of your coined term phrases that I love is empathic accuracy. And I think that when it comes to empathy, I think of intuition, right? It's the ability to kind of like feel into how someone else is feeling. But if you're not very clear and present, you are often projecting into that relationship or into that feeling. And so you can get an
Absolutely.
inaccurate read. Am I getting close to what you mean by that?
Oh yeah, you are. I wish I had coined the term. I didn't. It's a term though in psychological
Is it
research that
okay?
and but you're defining it exactly right. It's understanding what someone else is feeling. And there's an interesting experiment that I think you'll like, which is they looked at couples who had been together, like who were just dating, and then couples who'd been together 5, 10 years.
Hmm.
And the question was, who's better at tuning into their partner's feelings? Because you
Hmm.
would think that we'd get better and better the longer we're together
Right.
than when we first are getting to know each other. It turns out it's just the opposite.
Interesting.
That the people who are best at tuning into someone's feelings are when we're just dating. Because if you think
Interesting.
about it, you're looking at this person and saying, like, are they into me? Right. And
Right.
and so you're watching every gesture, right? And
Right.
every eyebrow raise, right? And then they found that the people who'd been together 5, 10, 20 years were much worse at knowing what their partner was feeling because we assume we know. And so can I bring in another Zen quote?
Please do. I
So
love it.
it's from Suzuki Roshi,
Right.
who who talked about beginner's mind.
Zen
And
Mind,
that's what we're
Beginner's Mind, the first book I read on
exactly,
Zen.
exactly. And he says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. And in
Hmm.
the expert's mind, there are few.
That's right.
So we all think we're experts in this partner we've been with for 20 years. So bring beginner's mind again
I
to,
love that. Yeah.
yeah.
That discussion about, I use the whole story of the Zen story I co-opted for a parable in my book 8 Weeks of Seal Fit, and I'm talking about the arrogant guy who wanted to come out to meet the master, and that was me. I didn't say that in the book, but it was obvious. And and we sat down and had a beer and to talk about it, but he was so full of his ideas that I just kept pouring the beer and it flooded all over the place. And he's looking at me like, "What are you doing, sir?" I said, "Well, you need to empty your cup. Like you don't have any room. You don't have any room for my teaching." So I,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
used the Zen
yeah,
parable. I don't think anyone,
yeah.
but yeah, you
Because
got to empty the cup, because knowledge ultimately, even in a relationship, I never thought about it. I usually think about it in terms of like content areas, but it's the same. It's true in content areas, right?
yeah,
Even if you're an expert in psychiatry, if you're not emptying your cup, you've got no room for new information.
exactly. And what they find is that the more expert people become, the more expert you are, the more you're aware of how much you don't know. That if you're
That's right.
really an expert, you're more and more aware of what you don't know.
That's exactly right. And that's when you, as an expert, you've also had the benefit of some dissolution of ego. So
Yeah.
you're not saying I own all this knowledge. You're saying,
And
well, this
I
knowledge
don't have to know, right?
you
I
don't
don't
have to
have
know.
to.
That's fascinating. How do we know, back to empathic accuracy, how do we know when we're around? And it's probably fairly obvious because we can feel it. But most people, I get a lot of people who tell me they get stuck in relationships that for years they don't realize that they've been drained. They're like
Mm,
vampire
mm,
relationships. So how do we
yeah.
know when someone's really uplifting us and has our energetically beneficial for us, or they're not, they're negative for us?
Yeah. Well, you can feel it. And I bet we're probably so accustomed to screening out that feeling that we don't notice it, but you can feel when a connection you're having is energizing or when it's draining. I mean, you and I, we've never met before.
Yeah.
Talking to you right now, I'm getting more energy.
Yeah. Ditto.
So
That's great.
this is an energizing encounter, right? But
Hmm.
you probably know what it's like to be with somebody and you just feel like
Oh, even
you're
on a podcast. Yeah. I've
exact.
been,
I
I've
bet.
been drained by podcast guests before. I'm like, oh my
I,
God.
I bet. I know. Yes, I can imagine. And that must be
Hopefully I've
difficult.
never done it to anybody else, but you
Oh
never
my
know.
gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. But so what I'd say is that maybe what the message might be to cultivate your own sense, which is within you. Try to notice what it feels like to have your energy raised by being with somebody and what it feels like to have your energy depleted. And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean you have to go away from the depleting ones. That you don't have to. In fact, sometimes we want to stay right there in relationships that drain our energy, but we need to learn how to manage that.
How to protect ourselves and protect the
Yeah,
energy. Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
And it's a
this is
physical feeling, it's visceral.
right. I totally agree. Yeah, and you can just simply, be present and ask yourself after the interactions: is do I feel uplifted or do I feel drained? And if you
Yeah.
feel drained, then there's a good chance that that relationship is draining.
And the other place you can do that is when you use social media.
Right. I was
That
going to get there. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't mean to jump the
No,
gun
I'm
here.
anxious because I was thinking, but this also relates to technology and the cacophony of the town hall that we deal with. So, what are some of the strategies for using that in a positive way?
Well, there is some research about this, and what it shows is that if we use social media actively to connect with people, that increases our well-being. Often it increases our energy. So, for
Hmm.
example, a friend of mine during the lockdown of COVID reconnected with his elementary school friends. And
Oh, cool.
now they have coffee every Sunday morning on Zoom, and they are just thrilled getting reconnected with each other, right? So that enhanced his well being. On the other side, if we use social media passively, if we scroll through other people's Instagram feeds, for
Hmm.
example,
Hmm.
it lowers our well being. It makes us feel like we're missing out, like
Hmm.
we are not having the good lives we want. And this is particularly difficult for adolescents. Adolescents are very susceptible to depression and anxiety from this kind of passive social media use.
Right.
So again, the test you could use for yourself is, after I spend 10 minutes on this site or doing this thing on the internet, how do I feel? After I've spent 10 minutes doing this other thing, how do I feel? And point yourself toward the more energizing things.
Right. That's awesome. We probably have to wrap up soon. I want to be sensitive to your time, but a couple practical takeaways for the listeners. You have a model in your book that is an acronym WISER. I would love for you to just kind of walk us through what that is as a high level kind of thing, and for someone saying, "Oh, that's great. Now, what do I do tomorrow?" Is there like a start here kind of best practice? So it's two questions, and we'll kind of wrap it up.
Okay, sure. So the wiser model is really just a way to make sense of something upsetting or confusing that somebody else did, right?
Hmm.
So let's say you get a text saying, I need to talk to you right away, all caps, exclamation point. Right? So you don't know what
That's
that
going to trigger
means.
your sympathetic nervous system a little
Yeah,
bit. Yeah.
exactly. Now, it could, and so what if you say, "Oh my gosh, it's my boss and she's mad at me and she's going to fire me and I'm going to be fired. And what am I going to do? And how am I going to find another job?" Like, you could go down this cascade, because what
Right.
we find is that when somebody does something we don't understand or that's upsetting, we fill in the blanks
That's right.
about why they did it. So the wiser model is just a way to slow it down, not to fill in the blanks, but to
Right.
say, "Oh, that text, I've got to see you right away. Maybe it's because something exciting happened in this
Right.
person's life. Maybe it's because they won the lottery. Maybe, who knows?" But in other words, you slow it down and you think, well, what are the possibilities?
Yeah.
And then how do I want to respond given all these different possible scenarios? And then you engage with the person, see how it worked out, rather than just firing off an upset or angry response or a scared
Right.
response, or so it's really just slowing it down when we can. So that's the
Real cool.
wiser model.
Right.
um, and then what can people do? So one of the things people can do, like, you could take out your phone right now and think of someone you want to connect with that you miss or you haven't seen in a while, and just send them a text, send them an email, and say, "Just thinking of you and wanted to say hi," and
Yeah, I
send
love
it.
that.
That's all you have to do, and see what happens. Just see what happens. You will be amazed at how much positive stuff comes back to you if you do it again and again. It won't happen every time with every person, but
Hmm.
more often than not, it
By
will.
the way, start with your wife or husband and kids.
Yes. Yes. Yes,
I make it a point several times a day to just send a quick note to my son and to my wife, say, "Hey, thinking about you," and it's powerful. They love it.
fabulous, fabulous. And then the other thing, let's say you're lonely and you feel like, I don't have relationships. And what we find is that if you put yourself in situations where you're doing something you care about alongside other people who care about the same thing, that's a natural place to start conversations because you have
Right,
something in common. It could be
right.
anything. It could be a gardening club. It could be, a basketball league. It could be a
That's
political
right.
cause. It could be anything, right? And so
Mhm.
if so do that. Another thing you can do is to put yourself in a situation where you are of service to other
You're
people.
right. Mhm,
Volunteer at a food bank or a soup kitchen.
mhm,
Volunteer to read to children.
mhm.
Teach English as a second language. So many things you could do. Bring meals. If you have a car, or if you can walk, bring meals to people who are shut ins. There's so many ways that being of service brings you into contact with people who want your help, who want to connect with you.
Yes. That's so phenomenal, and we should probably pin it there. The Good Life, Lessons from the World's Longest Scientific Study in Happiness. Phenomenal book. Recommend everyone listening get a copy and read it. And do you have is there like a platform for the book, or where do you like people to kind of like connect with you, or where do you like to connect with people who are
Oh,
interested in your work?
sure. Well, there's a book website, thegoodlifebook.com. You
Right.
can find it. There's my robertwaldinger.com website, and or you could look for me on Insight Timer.
There you go. I love Insight Timer. I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Dr. Waldinger, thank you so much for your time. It's been a phenomenal and very insightful conversation and brought me a lot of energy and joy. So thank you so much and
This
happy practicing.
this was a total pleasure. Thank you for doing this with me.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you so much. Hoo-yah.